who is the Chief Academic Officer and the Dean of the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine.
Thank you so much, and let me say welcome to all of you, and welcome to the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. I'm delighted that you have joined us for what is truly a momentous occasion when we get to hear from the team of doctors and their collaborator from the University of Pittsburgh who evaluated the first group of diplomats who were affected by this truly unknown phenomenon in Havana last year. It is truly a perfect example of what scientific collaboration and what I call team science can really do in helping us solve some of the vexing healthcare challenges that we face. The report you're about to hear from our physicians and collaborators who first were involved in the treatment of these patients really underscore what probably happened, and it's going to be quite illuminating to hear from them as far as their understanding of what may have transpired. Without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Michael Hoffer, Dr. Bonnie Levin, Dr. Hilary Snap, Dr. Consensus Peluso, as well as the collaborator from the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Carrie Balaban.
We'll start in English y seguimos en español después.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much for coming down. Before I start, I want to say what this is today is honoring a promise that our public affairs people made to all of you over the last 18 months. We cannot publish scientifically and talk publicly before an article comes out. So many of you, almost all of you, contacted our public affairs department and said, I want to speak with them. And we said, when the article comes out, we'll do everyone together, we'll give everyone the same opportunity. That is the reason we're here today. It's just to talk about the article that you all wanted information about before, and to do it so everyone gets the same opportunity at the same period of time. And when we stray from talking about the article, we'll try to direct you back to that, because that's the purpose of today, the article that we published. Many of you got a PDF, but there'll be a URL where everyone can go on the URL, and anyone in the world can go on the URL and see the article. So with that as a rejoinder, in February of 2017, I got an interesting phone call. After serving 21 years in the military and now being here 5 years at UM, I never even got this phone call when I was in the military. And the phone call was, this is the State Department, we have a problem. And the individual on the phone told me about an individual in Havana who had heard odd noises, had felt some pain in his ear, and had ringing in his ear. And the next morning was dizzy and confused. And the rationale for calling me was the following. Number one, Dr. Balaban and I have extensive experience with blast trauma and have published extensively on that. And this sounded to them initially like a blast trauma. Number two, I still had a security clearance, still have a security clearance. At that point, it was secure. And number three, we're in Miami. Almost very commonly, diplomats in the United States who are stationed in Central Latin America, South America, or the Caribbean come to Miami to go to Costco or go to Walmart. So they could easily transport people up here to see us without raising any odd concerns, like if they would go to Washington State or something. So we saw that individual, and then with the wonderful help of our people in otolaryngology and neurology, saw more individuals. Most referred by the State Department, but some self-referred. And what we found, and we're going to describe today, is objective evidence of balance disorders that affect the gravity organs and unique cognitive dysfunction. So this is objective, it's not controversial, the evidence is there, the people had abnormalities. The take-home points for you all are, this is the first and only report of the individuals seen acutely shortly after their injury. It's not affected by time, which can change people's disease presentations. It's not affected by variable amounts of treatment. Like if you get a little treatment or get a little medicine, that may change what you look like. It's not affected by workers' comp concerns. And it's not affected by media coverage of what you should complain of. So not only is it the first and only, there can never be another one, because now that the media's covered it, people know what to complain about. So it's the only one that's ever going to come out as the first naive report of this condition. It does not seem to resemble traumatic brain injury in the way that our extensive experience has shown it. We're not saying it's not an injury to the brain, it may be. We do know for sure that it's an injury to the ear and that the brain is affected. Is the brain affected from the ear? Is the brain affected directly? We don't know and can't determine that yet. This is retrospective, and that's important for everyone to understand. We saw these individuals as patients. When you are seeing individuals as patients, all you can do is what's medically indicated when the patient sees you. They come see me for a hearing loss, they get a hearing test. They come see me for a balance disorder, they get a balance test. Not only that, we had to work within the time frame they were given to us, and we had to get insurance approval for everything we did. We sometimes only had the individual for a day. We couldn't get every test in a day. We sometimes, only had the individual for half a day. So it's important to understand that we did this for patient care, and then later on went to our IRB and got approval to look at the data in a retrospective fashion. So yeah, there are holes because that's what happens when you see patients for medical care. If you do a prospective study and do the same thing on everyone, you have to get consent in advance. And these patients were not consented in advance. They were seeing us as patients. So before moving on to the rest of our colleagues, I do want to single out one group. I'll have some more thank yous later on. But there's a number of medical individuals and individuals at the State Department who are dedicated, hardworking individuals who have really spent the last year to year and a half working on this. I'm not allowed to give their names, but these people are wonderful, and they're really heroes in my book. We have no issues with what the State Department did. They're a great group of individuals, and I'm only sorry that I cannot name their names today. I'll have some thank yous to the people in Miami at the end of the presentations, but now I'll turn over to Dr. Hilary Snap, our Director of Audiology at the University of Miami. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all. So as Dr. Hoffer mentioned, my name is Hilary Snap, and I am a clinician scientist. I maintain a practice in evaluating patients with balance disorder, and so that was really my role here with these individuals. And as he mentioned, we saw them as clinical patients acutely. When these individuals presented to our clinic, their primary complaints were of dizziness and disorientation. Some of them also complained of auditory concerns or hearing concerns. And upon evaluation, we found a distinct clinical profile. Auditory assessment was really unremarkable. So although they were concerned of their hearing due to a perception of hearing a sound or feeling a pressure in their ear, our standard clinical hearing test did not reveal hearing loss, except in 2 individuals who were determined to have had a pre-existing hearing loss prior to coming to our clinic. When we evaluated them for balance, we found a distinct profile that showed universal abnormalities in this group in the otolithic organs. And so this is the part of the balance system that senses gravity and linear acceleration. If you look to the paper, you'll see that there were 2 specific tests that we did that were particularly helpful in this. The first is known as the VEMP test, or the vestibular evoked myogenic potential test. And what this is a test that investigates the balance nerve and the otolithic organs. It's a myogenic potential, meaning that we measure it in the muscle, and it is evoked in response to a very loud acoustic stimulus, which in turn is, again, measured in the muscle, and the response reflects activity that is mediated by the vestibular system or our balance system. The second test, the SVV test, or subjective visual vertical test, assesses one's ability to orient a line vertically relative to the earth. So we present a line in a darkened room that's off-center, leaning to the right or left, starting at various angles, and the task is for the individual to set it vertical or straight up and down. And we do this in the absence of any other visual input, and that's an important component because when we remove the visual input and put them into a darkened room, they have to rely on their balance system to help them make judgments about how to orient things up and down. And so these were the two primary findings leaning towards a issue in the balance system or the inner ear. So our balance organ is inside of the inner ear. It is coupled to our auditory organ, and its responsibility is to detect movement. And so when we move our head, this balance organ detects movement and integrates that information in the brain with visual input as well as proprioceptive input. And that allows us to maintain our balance and to maintain our orientation in space. And so there's two primary components to this organ, the first being one that detects rotational movement, so turning your head, and the other component that detects linear movement, such as going up in an elevator. And this is the part that also senses gravity. So there's a reason why you're in an elevator. When you're in an elevator and you're moving up, you can sense that you're moving up, even though visually you don't see anything moving around you. And that's because gravity is pulling on that organ and providing that information to us. When that organ loses the ability to appropriately sense gravity, concepts like up and down become meaningless, and it can be very disorienting to a patient. And it's also difficult for a patient to characterize. Issues like this in this part of the organ, the gravity center, are distinctly different from common ailments that we see with patients complaining of dizziness, specifically a spinning sensation or vertigo. This population did not primarily complain of spinning. They complained of feeling off, disoriented, or imbalanced, which was strongly linked, again, to the objective findings of issues in this otolith organ, or the gravity sensor. It's also strongly linked to the neurocognitive findings that we found subsequently that I will go ahead and pass on to Dr. Levin to describe to you next.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bonnie Levin. I am the founder and director of the Division of Neuropsychology and professor of neurology, Department of Neurology here in the Miller School of Medicine. I also saw these patients in the acute phase, and as Dr. Hoffer mentioned, one of the opportunities that one has seeing someone in the acute phase is that they come in with symptoms. They haven't been formally diagnosed. There's no label. There's no expectations. And once they undergo testing and they are formally labeled, this naturally from people take on a meaning of a bona fide problem, and it takes on a life of its own. So we actually saw these individuals before formal diagnosis, and we were able to see people at a time when they were just complaining of individual symptoms. My assessment of these individuals is that the individual symptoms were not random, they were not isolated, and actually they fit together as a constellation of symptoms that would that have been shown in the literature through animal and human studies that these problems cluster together: vestibular, cognitive, and emotional complaints. Specifically, when we evaluated these individuals, their subjective and behavioral complaints consisted of what we call a cognitive fog, that something wasn't right, they felt off, they felt imbalanced in their thinking. Increased anxiety and irritability was practically uniform. Trouble regulating their emotion, feeling ups and downs, moodiness, again with anxiety, irritability, low frustration tolerance, difficulty paying attention and staying on task demands, problems with rapid decision making, especially under complex conditions, reduced organizational skills, and problems retrieving information on demand. This was the constellation of cognitive and subjective emotional and behavioral complaints. Neuropsychological testing, in fact, confirmed these subjective symptoms: reduced complex auditory processing, word-finding difficulties, difficulties involving sustained focused attention and vigilance, problems organizing sequential material during increasingly high levels of cognitive demand, and compromised working memory, less efficient learning and retrieval of information in conditions with competing information. So again, these were not under simple conditions, they were in complex, high demand tasks. The key points I want to make are that their subjective complaints were in fact confirmed by objective neuropsychological testing, demonstrating a unique constellation of behavioral and cognitive and emotional dysfunction, that these findings cluster together in a way that there's animal and clinical literature showing that these types of symptoms have in fact been reported in studies with who have received vestibular damage or dysfunction. There are animal studies showing that vestibular dysfunction has resulted in increased irritability and cognitive deficits in an animal model as well as in clinical models. That we don't understand the exact source, but that we do believe that there is a common neural circuitry or anatomic pathway that underlies this particular constellation of events which involve vestibular, cognitive, and emotional changes.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Balaban. I'm currently professor of otolaryngology at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, where I've been a faculty member since 1988. Just a brief bit of background to why you see the scientist, this basic scientist from another university sitting here. My doctoral research was done at University of Chicago in what became neuroscience afterwards. And I experienced in neurophysiology, particularly of the central vestibular system. As a postdoc, I first got that at University of Tokyo in Tokyo, Japan. My research program and the way I've approached this is multidisciplinary. I approach biology from what we call a system of systems approach, which means we approach the human function as a complex system made up of smaller subsystems working together. Vestibular system works with a visual system, works with our system of pressure sensation to judge where we are in the world in relation to gravity and whether we're in a vehicle moving, and to make assumptions about this. They assist us basically in situation awareness about where we are. And so injury to the vestibular system and the vestibular periphery can disrupt our situational awareness. That's part of what underlies the cognitive fog that Dr. Levin was talking about. A lot of this work that over the last several decades that I've done on this has resulted in identification of circuits and some formal models for why we see so much co-occurrence of balance disorders, specific forms of anxiety disorders, and migraine headaches. We can get more into this in details later on, but there are common neural circuits and common transmitters that underlie much of this. And sort of because of this background and the fact that Dr. Hoffer and I have been close collaborators for about 25 years now, when he first heard about this and saw part of the problem, he called me in to help figure out scientifically, as part of modern team science, how do we proceed on this? The most important thing is people received a possible unknown exposure. They're showing something that looks a little bit strange. Let's get the personnel on board that we can at least figure out within the constraints, the difficult constraints of, here they are reported for clinical observation, and you can only do things that are diagnostically justified. How do we figure out what we can? These are some of the results that we've presented in the paper. One of the important things I want to talk about that's in the background and hasn't been addressed is the possibility of a directed energy exposure to these people, which has been mentioned widely, as we all know, in the popular press. Directed energy is basically what we say it is. It's some direction of, it's some energy in some form, pointed, focused on an object or on a person. The energy may be acoustic, pressure waves. You've probably heard of LRAD devices they've discussed in the press. So ultrasound is one mode that can be used for this. We also can have radio frequency. We could have microwave. We could have light. Lasers are an example of it. I'm going through these just as examples. I'm agnostic as to what may have happened. I'll tell you right off, I don't know. But these are in the literature, and there are possible precedents that one needs to think about if we want to understand what happened to these individuals, what may happen in the future, and more importantly, to diagnose and deliver better care, the best care to our people who we have the utmost respect for, putting themselves in harm's way for all of us, and deserve all of our best efforts here when we see something that may have happened, whether inadvertent or whether deliberate, and we don't know. That doesn't affect it, those issues. It's been known for about 50 years, as you've probably seen mentioned in some of the articles, that if we direct a pulse of radar, of electromagnetic energy at a person, that you can hear it. You can hear a click. It does create recordable pressure waves inside animals. Work was done on this, extensive work was done on this, supported in part by Department of Defense in the 1960s through 1980s. The type of energy that we're talking about here and the articles, it suggests, balanced system could be one of the systems affected. We don't know. The fact is, when faced with the unknown, you don't want to rule anything out. You want to check it out to see. From what we know from work that we've previously published, as Dr. Levin referred to, that the existence of balance dysfunction or disorientation to an inner ear cause can affect cognitive function. All possibilities. It's a puzzle. If you get the question, if it's a question of what done it or who done it, the answer is yes. So to summarize briefly, what I think is important that we show in this published study is that we can have measurable, quantifiable evidence that something really did happen. It's not just hysteria. You'll notice, if you look at the tables, that we drew some very strict boundaries for saying what's abnormal. Lower 5th percentile in performance. If 80% or more of the people are in the lower 5th percentile out of a group reporting a similar exposure, you think something might have happened? The answer is, okay, that's for our inference. I would argue it certainly bears us looking more carefully at it and all of the possibilities. The effects were both on measurable with tests from a specialty clinic, the neurotology clinic, on measurable tests that are well known and used clinically, by the way, every day, and also on well-validated, well-known neuropsychological evaluation instruments. So the point one, something happened. Corollary of that, if other people come in thinking they had the exposure, we can at least look to see if they show this same feature. Is it the same thing or is it something different? It can be documented. And this is very important for many reasons, for policy reasons, as well as healthcare reasons inside our system. This is very important to have right now. We also know that it affects both balance and cognitive functions. I want to make it eminently clear that we don't know what they were exposed to, and certainly can't make any inferences as to whether it was deliberate or inadvertent. No idea. However, there are precedents that there's some biological exposures to directed energy or to other kinds of modalities that could cause such a thing. In fact, if you take a look at the commercially available, commercial off-the-shelf, called as COTS as an abbreviation, devices, there are a number of pest control devices you can buy from your home that emit ultrasound and emit electromagnetic pulses. These are in the safe range, but it shows you the technology is there and could be placed inside a room that could do such a thing. The possible sources and the medical findings we have here do not have a quick or easy solution. I wish someone could tell us that right now, okay? I wish we'd have that. So the way we view this is that it's an area for active research. I'm currently doing some research sponsored by the Office of Naval Research, where we're looking at using computer simulation and a variety of physical and biological models to just get an idea of what are likely possibilities. We don't want to, we're not ready to rule anything out yet, but we're ready to find evidence so that we can rule things out. We have no favored cause. This is supported by Code 34 of the Office of Naval Research. Program manager is Kirk Yankaskis. I can give some information later on for that. The Captain Matthew Sweargoes, and a scientist there, Dr. Patrick Mason, are also part of that staff and have been contributing toward trying to figure this out, at least getting a feeling for this. We view this paper as being a first step that's very important. We can offer some demonstrable criteria with well-established tests for anyone else presenting to say, does this look like the same thing, or are we facing something different? And that first step is the first clue we have to go on toward trying to figure out what sort of exposure, or what sort of cause, I won't even say exposure, what sort of cause might there be for this? So we can understand, control, mitigate, diagnose, and treat people properly in the future. I'll now pass on to my colleague. Oh,
Yeah. So I'm going to finish up in English, and then we're going to pass it on to our Spanish presentation. I want to just highlight a couple of things. Dr. Balaban spoke about our abnormal criteria that Dr. Snap presented. If you come to our clinic and we do these tests on you, and they're clinically available, FDA-approved tests, there's one level for abnormal. We did not call patients in this paper abnormal unless they were double that bad. So this is not just you walking into our clinic. You had to meet a criteria or a bar that was very strict. That's one important thing to realize. The second important thing to realize is, as I said earlier, this is and can only be the only acute report of this, of naive patients. The media has covered it extensively, and now we're covering it, and it's been published on several times. So any report in the future, even if it's a lot more patients, the patients won't be naive. And knowing what you could have or knowing what could happen to you changes the way diseases present. And that's why this is important. It's not that we're breaking the news that there was something happened in Cuba. All we're saying is what they look like when they came to Miami. It's important that we all remember that. That's all we're talking about. Before passing on, and we'll take questions after our Spanish presentation. Before we pass it on to our Spanish presentation, I want to do some thank yous. It's really important. Dr. Fred Etzel is the vice chair of otolaryngology, and Dr. Ralph Sacco is the chairman of neurology, all here at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Without these individuals' support, none of this work would have ever been done. We had wonderful support from our media consultants and from the folks at Wiley. We've put the URL up on the board. I know some of you got pre-printed publications, but you'll get much richer publications from that URL. We publish open access. Dr. Balaban and I really only believe in publishing open access. Science is for the world to see. So please publish this URL and hit it. Anyone who hits it anywhere in the world can see the article, and that's really important. Science is for the people, not for the scientists. We'd also like to always thank our families because, you know, when you do this work, you're taken away from your family. And most of all, the really hardworking individuals in the Department of Otolaryngology and the Department of Neurology who really, they dropped everything. These people came in and they saw us during incredibly busy clinics. They were already scheduled. And they would still fit in and still got quality care. And it takes an amazing team of people, not us, an amazing team of people on the front lines to make that happen. And they're really the ones that deserve the most credit. So I'm going to now pass on to our, in deference to the fact this is Miami, our Spanish language individual, Dr. Peluso.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Constanza Peluso, yo estoy a cargo de los estudios de investigación del Departamento de Otorrino de la Universidad de Miami. En este momento les voy a resumir en español lo que nuestro equipo de la Universidad de Miami está presentando acerca de los hallazgos agudos del fenómeno de la Embajada de Havana. En nuestra clínica, nosotros evaluamos un número de pacientes que se presentaron con una combinación de síntomas que incluyeron desbalance, pérdida de la audición, dificultad para concentrarse, tinnitus o ruido en los oídos, dolor de oído. Las evaluaciones de los pacientes sintomáticos consistieron en exámenes rutinarios y objetivos en nuestra clínica, que incluyen medida de la magnitud de la visión vertical, medida de los movimientos de antisacada, examen rotacional de los reflejos vestibulares, potenciales evocados vestibulares, examen de la audición y medidas neuropsicológicas. Los resultados de estas evaluaciones muestran la evidencia de una disfunción en el balance que afectó los órganos del equilibrio del oído interno y un patrón único de disfunción cognitiva. Este es el primer y único informe de la presentación aguda, observada poco después de la exposición de este grupo de pacientes. No ha habido ni puede haber otro informe como este, y como tal se encuentra entre las contribuciones más importantes en este campo y es clave para descubrir qué sucedió realmente. Esto no parece asemejarse a una lesión cerebral traumática en el sentido del uso actual de la palabra. Es una disfunción de los órganos del equilibrio del oído interno y una disfunción cognitiva. Aunque este trabajo es un trabajo retrospectivo, es importante destacar el poder de un gran equipo interdisciplinario que abarca especialidades y universidades. Muchas gracias por su atención y respondemos preguntas.
He had his hand up first and then you.
You're consulting with your patients and maybe loved ones of your patients, and they want to know what happened to them. How'd that conversation go? What'd you tell them?
That's a difficult conversation when we don't actually know what happened. So we would tell the individuals that you were affected by something and now you're showing these objective signs. We would only say with the objective signs. You have a inner ear gravity organ disorder. You have some cognitive disorders. We don't know what caused it. We just know that now you're showing these signs and you weren't showing them before. And intervening, there was this noise or pressure. So we were vague with regards to what could cause it, but we were specific about what they were suffering from.
The range of presentation was from things not feeling right to frank clinical impairments. And in many cases, there was this feeling that things were off and they were very upset and jumpy and trouble paying attention, but they weren't interfering with every aspect of their life. It was something that they knew was off. And so we were able, through objective testing, to at least verify that the symptoms that they were experiencing were not in their imagination. It wasn't just, some sort of anxiety that they were experiencing, but that whatever they were feeling was, in fact, we would give them the feedback based on the testing.
Doctora Constanza, en español, por favor. Se ha hablado mucho de ataques sónicos. Eso es lo que desde que esto sucedió, eso es lo que más ha salido
En este momento yo no le puedo responder esa pregunta. Lo único que le podemos presentar es lo que encontramos con los síntomas y lo que los pacientes nos describieron. Y ellos nos describieron un ruido agudo con presión. Fuera de eso no le puedo decir cuál fue exactamente la causa.
Y normalmente, por ejemplo, cuando pacientes, personas presentan este tipo de daños, normalmente, ¿qué es lo que lo causa? No hablando de estos diplomáticos, de otras personas basadas en la experiencia médica suya.
Let me translate. Normally what happens when those type of events happen? What are the symptoms of the patients? What are the causes you want to say?
So, yeah, okay. So, en inglés y ella en español. Okay. So, what was asked, as I understand it, is what are other things that cause hearing loss? What are other things that cause dizziness? What are other things that cause ringing in the ear? And those things range almost the entire range of diseases. So you can get those things from an infection in the ear, whether it be bacterial or viral. You can get those things from a allergy in the ear. You can get those things from a tumor in the ear. You can get those things from, a variety of other ailments that affect the ear, like there are congenital conditions or there are medical conditions that we don't understand. So, I only see people with hearing balance and ringing in the ear. And there's 6 of us at Miami that only do that. So there's so many causes of ailments in this area. That's why we have so many individuals. So unfortunately, people can have the same symptoms and have many different causes. And yes, we certainly know that a tumor may look a little different than an infection, but sometimes when they come in with just hearing loss, it could be either.
To be clear, did any of these patients present with tumors or infections in their ears?
None of these patients had infections in the ear or tumors that we know about. Does Connie want to, you needed it in Spanish or not?
I would like to have
Okay. Let her translate what I said and then we'll take other questions.
Doctor, lo que dijo el doctor Hofer es que esto puede ser causado por diferentes causas, infecciones virales, infecciones por bacterias, tumores o partes internas del oído. Fuera de eso, no tenemos otra causa en este momento. Pueden pasar por muchas causas, pero no podemos decir nada más.
Esa respuesta que usted da descarta entonces la teoría de que el gobierno cubano quizás.
We have a lot of people who are asking questions, so we really need to get
Dr.
to
Hofer,
Yes, sir.
about what you said earlier. You said we have no issue with what the State Department did. Can you explain that? And one more question. A State Department spokesperson says they never authorized this study or even knew about it. Why didn't you consult the State Department officials and their medical team about this?
So that's just hogwash. So number one, what I'm saying, I had no issues. We're not talking about State Department issues. You guys can have those discussions with state if you want. There was some reports about state and different government agencies. As far as we're concerned, they were wonderful people to work with. Okay, they saw the study. They cleared the study. They had to clear the study. In fact, the study spent 9 months in the State Department getting cleared to make sure it didn't have any classified information in it. So anyone at the State Department who said they didn't see it is flat out lying. They saw it.
And what did you mean when you said earlier, we have no issue with what the State Department did?
No, I'm saying we're not. I meant to say we're not going to talk issues about who did what with this. We're talking about our study today.
But you don't have any issues with the State Department taking its victims in Cuba to the University of Pennsylvania, perhaps?
The State Department can do what they want. We saw these patients. Today we're talking about the acute presentation.
Dr. Hoffer, regarding the phenomenon, the enigma as it still is, how baffling is this for you and your team? And ultimately, what do you know specifically and what don't you know still?
We know specifically what happens when this group of individuals presented acutely. We have objective evidence that they had abnormalities, objective evidence, kind of incontrovertible objective evidence that they had an abnormality when they presented acutely. What caused it, who did it, why it was done, we don't know any of those things. It's not entirely our job. Dr. Balaban alluded to the fact that the military is funding some work in our labs to look at some things, but that work is just beginning. So I think it's vexing for all Americans, all people around the world, that people can be harmed and not know why. But you know, we have to let the science play out. It's an important science to do. That's the important science, but we don't know the answers.
Dr. Hopper, for those of us who don't have MDs or PhDs, can you explain the basic difference between your findings and those in the JAMA report? And I'm a little unclear from reading the paper whether you disagree with the idea that these people do have traumatic brain injury.
I can address that. So first of all, let's everybody understand, we presented the patients acutely as they first presented. The individuals at Penn were seen many, many months later, and those individuals had some things happen to them in the meantime.
Well, not the more recent patients. They would have been seen immediately.
Right, but 90% of those patients were seen 200 and some odd days out.
How many did Dr. Hopper?
Yeah.
How many patients Nora's question?
But can you finish answering my question?
I appreciate.
Done with her, Nora.
Okay. So there are many diseases that start looking one way and change their presentation over time. So it could be that this is what they start out with, and at Penn, that's where they get to after 6 to 8 months. That's one thing. It's also possible, Bonnie mentioned things, that when they saw us, they were naive. By the time they got to Penn, they had a label, they had a lot of things happening in their lives, and that makes people act differently when they have a disease. And Bonnie can kind of elaborate on that a little bit. Now let me just ask about the TBI question. We don't know where the injury is. We definitely know there's an injury in the inner ear, right at the area where the gravity organs are. That problem, as Dr. Snap explained, can put you in a state where if you don't know which way up is, by the way, it's hard to do everything else in your life. So that problem alone can't account for cognitive issues. But there are common circuits. But there could easily be an injury in the brain. We just don't know that. Nora's next, yeah. Hey, Nora, how are you?
Hi. The Cuban diplomats are right now giving a speech in Havana, and the diplomat is saying that they're not doubting that something happened to the diplomats, but we cannot be sure that what happened to them is linked to them being in Havana. So, how would you respond to that? Are you sure that the injuries you studied happened after, they were exposed to that unknown source in Havana?
Anyone who tells you they're sure of anything in medicine is not telling the truth. But these individuals had symptoms that were proximate to hearing the noise or feeling pressure, number one. Number two, when they came to us, they didn't know they should be complaining about anything because they were naive. And number three, we did some objective testing on them that shows that they would have, and again, with this much of an abnormality, they would have been noticing something beforehand if it indeed was happening. So I can't be sure. All I can say is X happened, pressure and noise, and then they had symptoms.
Dr. Hopper, you've really emphasized that these patients came to you in a state before the media reports, et cetera, that they were naive. However, I understand that you saw far more patients than were actually confirmed as suffering from the symptoms, and then in order to get the patients from Havana to see you, there were meetings at the embassy in which a laundry list of symptoms were outlined. If you have any of these things, please come forward. We'll take you to Miami, and we will check you out. So how naive were they really?
They did share information with each other. That's true. But they didn't know exactly how to explain it in a way that would be consistent unless they had actually experienced it. So that was number one. So when you start asking them questions and they say, I'm dizzy, it's like, when did you get dizzy? What does it feel like? How does it feel? When did you feel the pressure? We asked them specific questions that would have been difficult to entirely fabricate. Not impossible, but difficult. Second of all, remember, they had objective tests that showed an abnormality. And those tests cannot be faked. So these tests that we did cannot be faked. So if it's abnormal, like this, 2 standard deviations, lower 5 percentile, you're not doing well.
Dr. Hopper, are they still experiencing symptoms? What condition are they in now?
We only today are reporting on the acute presentation, what's in the paper. We're not reporting on anything after that.
Can't say if they've improved
I can't comment. HIPAA alone would prevent me from commenting.
Do you think we were attacked?
I don't know. People felt something and they had a symptom afterwards. They had objective symptoms afterwards.
So you don't know who attacked.
It's not our rule.
And your results from your test, you keep saying you can't say what it was or if it was something, but can you, with your results, rule out any kind of mass hysteria amongst this group? Like one person, your results rule that out?
We believe they do. As Dr. Balaban said, when 85% of the people fall in the bottom 5%, that suggests on an objective test, that's suggesting that something happened.
And I'll chime in. In fact, this was really, you hit the challenge right on the head, okay, looking at this. And this was the first thing that needed to be answered as to whether we need to worry about it. We have no pre-testing on these folks, so we have no baseline testing. What sort of evidence can come forward? So we decided explicitly to adopt a very stringent criterion for clinically abnormal on standard tests. So remember, we're comparing this to a normal population of individuals. And when a high percentage show highly, in the lowest fifth percentile of performance that you would expect to see on that test, we believe that provides about the best evidence you can get that there is a clinically significant manifestation here that's measurable with validated FDA-approved tests. And at least you can go on from there to try to describe in more detail what it is. Remember, we had no idea we had some symptom reports. You have no idea of what's wrong. You can only do justifiable medical care. You can't call out a study and run them through. There's no opportunity to do that. So you try to figure out first, is this hysteria or is it medically justified, neurologically justified? And then you move on from there. And
Oh, yeah, go ahead. So she wants to ask, is this related?
Sobre la pregunta que estaba haciendo el compañero sobre qué piensan ellos del estudio de marzo de Yamal y qué comparación tienen con el actual estudio.
Dr. Hofer already responded the question. Do you want that I translate?
Oh, si tú sabes la respuesta.
Sí, sí. They're asking again about the JAMA publication. What?
So
The difference
So
you
yeah,
want,
yeah, the difference of findings. So our findings, and if you're going to translate, our findings were acute right after the injury. The JAMA findings were, most of the individuals were all over 6 months out, and some things had happened to them.
La diferencia de las dos es que nuestra publicación es una publicación de los síntomas agudos y la publicación de JAMA son 6 meses después de lo que el evento sucedió. Esa es la diferencia.
Ellos en llamas no analizaron a los pacientes.
No le puedo responder esa pregunta.
You said that you don't know exactly what caused this injury. As a doctor, you would recommend the State Departments and the U.S. government what they did basically to close the embassy and bring all the diplomats home?
I don't make foreign policy, I'm sorry.
You said that you don't know what the source is, but is it the same source that caused the symptoms in all the patients?
It's the clustering of the symptoms. So getting back to the issue of hysteria, and what's important here is that the symptoms cluster together. It's not just an isolated domain per se. It's the cognitive, the emotional, and the vestibular that are presenting together in a group of naive individuals who don't know what's wrong with them. So it hasn't even gotten to the point where you can reach the level of hysteria because they're not even sure what's happening to them. And it was the remarkable overlap that I think is the important feature to focus here in terms of ruling out mass hysteria.
Are there any other questions in English? Please be advised that we will have doctors available to do one-on-one interviews after the press conference outside
so we can hold the rest of the Spanish questions for that. Any other questions?
Just one quick question. How
Yes,
many
sir.
of you speaking today actually physically evaluated these videos?
The three of us did.
All three of you?
Okay, then yes, go ahead.
We've already seen, and it's safe to assume that they will continue, the Cuban government will, whether you guys are saying who's causing it or not, and I know you guys aren't. But since it's been considered or looked at so closely linked with the Cuban government, it's safe to assume that they're gonna just try to discredit this study at every turn. You guys are talking obviously though about objective evidence that proves that there is something wrong with them, source unknown, but something's wrong with them. So I guess what would you say to anyone who's trying to discredit this study?
And that will, of course, happen, that we have objective evidence that, again, we didn't take abnormal. We took way abnormal. And when this many people present with this amount of disability, Dr. Balaban has alluded to that, and when they present with the unique cognitive pattern that Dr. Levin described, it's hard to imagine that this just arises by chance in all of these individuals. So we're not saying who caused it or what caused it or why. We're just saying that a bunch of people came from the same place and had the same symptoms.
If you had the ability to look at where the source happened, what would you want to measure and take a look at?
Dr. Balaban may take that a little bit.
You know, we're not really sure. I mentioned that there are a lot of possibilities. That's why you need to consider all the possible modalities. And it's a pretty broad range. It includes, you think about toxins, you think about directed energy in all its different modalities, you think about energy affecting an inactive toxin. All these things that you've seen are possibilities. And it's tough to know what to look for.
I think those questions are better posited to the State Department, who's done I'm sure, some investigations.
Right.
Did all the patients actually work in the embassy, or were some working in other buildings in Havana or around Cuba?
I can't comment because of HIPAA.
They all happen at the same time, same date?
Can't comment because of HIPAA.